The rare but frequently fascinating and frightening shark attacks highlight the intricate relationship between humans and marine life. By keeping species populations in balance, these apex predators are essential to the upkeep of ocean ecosystems. Although attacks are sensationalized in the media, most sharks pose no threat to people. To coexist safely, it is crucial to comprehend their behavior, habitat, and conservation status. Responsible interaction is essential to safeguarding marine biodiversity and people as oceanic human activity increases. We can lessen conflicts and recognize sharks' crucial ecological role by treating marine life with respect. Here are 6 stories. With 5 of his closest friends, Russian billionaire Igor Mikhailov sailed from Cape Town, South Africa, on the evening of March 10, 2025, aboard his newly acquired $1 million yacht, the Volchitsa. The sleek contemporary vessel, built for luxury and adventure, was a testament to his immense wealth. That night, they celebrated his 47th birthday under a starry sky, away from the city's bustle. The sea's calmness was deceptive, masking an imminent encounter with one of nature's most powerful predators. On this voyage, prominent architect Nikolai Sokolov joined Igor, tech entrepreneur Alexei Zorin, former professional boxer Felix Petrov, oil magnate Vadim Komarov, and financier Dmitry Ivanov. After years of accumulating fortunes, the 6 men were now indulging in the lavish rewards of their success. As the yacht leisurely sailed off the western Cape Coast, the night air was filled with laughter and the clinking of expensive whiskey glasses. At approximately 11:30 p.m., an abrupt, violent jolt rocked the yacht. Glasses shattered as the men exchanged bewildered looks. Igor stood with a frown. Another, even more forceful impact struck, tilting the yacht dangerously. A grinding sound of metal against something solid reverberated through the hull. Felix stumbled and fell, hitting the edge of a chair. A rush of seawater gushed into the lower deck. Panic set in. Nikolai and Alexei dashed to assess the damage, but another ferocious impact fractured the hull further before they could descend. The yacht pitched violently as a deep, ominous groan emanated from its frame. The men struggled to maintain their footing. Then from the depths a monstrous figure emerged. The surface broke with a massive splash, a great white shark nearly 20 feet long, its dorsal fin slicing through the moonlit waters like a blade. It was not an ordinary predator. It attacked with an unnatural level of aggression. The ocean and the beast proved too much for the yacht, which capsized after one final catastrophic blow. Felix and Vadim, who had rushed below deck to retrieve emergency supplies, never resurfaced. The remaining 4 barely escaped as the sea swallowed the yacht whole. The frigid Atlantic waters shocked their bodies, leaving them gasping as wreckage floated around them, illuminated only by the dim moonlight. As they struggled to stay afloat, they realized their predicament. The ocean's vastness stretched endlessly around them, an unforgiving expanse devoid of any immediate hope of rescue. Their breaths came in ragged gasps, and their limbs grew heavier each minute. Ever the strategist, Igor attempted to calm the group, urging them to conserve their energy and stick together. But the terror had already settled in their hearts, and the shark's presence made rational thought nearly impossible. Every shadow beneath the surface, every ripple in the water, carried the threat of imminent death. Struggling to stay afloat, Nikolai, Alexei, Igor, and Dmitry clung to the floating debris, but the terror was far from over. The shark continued its relentless pursuit. For a brief moment, an eerie silence hung over the water, before it struck again. With a choked gasp, Nikolai was yanked beneath the surface in a swirl of red. The beast had taken him in a single, calculated lunge. The remaining 3 were paralyzed with fear, shivering from the cold. The shark's dark silhouette circled back. In desperation, Alexei swam toward what he believed to be a stable piece of wreckage. He didn't get far. The shark surged forward with terrifying speed, its jaws clamping down on him. A sickening crunch echoed in the water, followed by a strangled scream. Miraculously, Alexei managed to break free, though his body was torn and bleeding. He drifted away into the darkness, slipping in and out of consciousness. Now only Igor and Dmitry remained. Igor clung to a broken piece of the yacht's hull, his mind racing. He had conquered corporate empires and rivals, yet now he was utterly powerless against a force of nature. Dmitry, his breath ragged, struggled to keep himself above water. The shark, still insatiable, made its final move. Without warning, it surged from below. Dmitri was gone in an instant, dragged into the abyss. Bubbles surfaced, then vanished into the night. Igor was alone. His muscles stiffened from the relentless cold, his breath coming in short gasps. But the ocean had not finished claiming its due. A shadow loomed beneath him. Before he could react, the beast struck from below, its massive jaws locking around him. Igor disappeared beneath the surface. The water stilled. The eerie silence that followed was broken only by the gentle lapping of the waves against scattered debris. The sea had reclaimed its dominance, erasing any trace of the men who once celebrated so carefreely. The vast moonlit waters bore no witness, save for Alexei, whose consciousness wavered between reality and the abyss of unconscious terror. He drifted, his vision blurring, unsure if the salvation he sought would come or if he would join his friends in the depths. By dawn, a passing fishing vessel found Alexei barely clinging to life. His wounds were severe and his mind was shattered by the horrors he had witnessed. He was the sole survivor. When rescue crews arrived, they found only floating wreckage and eerie, blood-stained waters. There were no other survivors, no bodies, just a chilling mystery of how a single predator had wiped out 5 men in one night. Officials ruled the incident a tragic accident, but rumors spread among locals and seafarers. Some claimed the great white was larger, more persistent, and unlike any seen before. Superstitious whispers spoke of an ancient force of the deep, punishing those who trespassed in its domain. Others dismissed it as a freak anomaly of nature. Alexei, forever haunted, recounted the tale to anyone who would listen. His eyes held the weight of terror. The ocean had taken its due, leaving behind only whispers of that dreadful night, unanswered questions, lingering fear, and the undeniable reality of nature's most merciless predator. A sleek white yacht called Euphoria rocked gently on the waves off the rocky Western Australian coast in the summer of 2013. A group of 7 friends had rented the ship for a weekend trip. The journey was meant to be one of fun alcohol and reckless exploration, but it would end horribly, leaving a lasting impression on everyone involved. Sydney-born Lisa Denshaw, a 27-year-old marketing consultant, had initially expressed reluctance to go. She naturally feared the vast, unpredictably shifting ocean and did not particularly enjoy deep water. But she had been persuaded otherwise by her friends. They had assured her that it would be fun. It was a simple weekend getaway with the sun, good company, and drinks. So she agreed against her better judgment. The boat was anchored a few miles off the coast close to the Abrolhos Islands, notorious for their shark population and beautiful coral reefs. The group had been drinking for hours, the music blasting and their laughter resonating over the waves. There was a playful atmosphere, and the air was heavy with the smell of beer and salt water. 2 group members, Joel Harrington and Vincent Rallis, were particularly notable for being the catalysts for the night's activities. Both had a reputation for having a wild sense of humor. They decided it was time for a practical joke as the sun started to set, illuminating the sky with amber and crimson hues. Lisa is their target. Lisa was watching the horizon while leaning against the yacht's rail. Deep in thought, she was looking off into space when an unexpected force struck her back. Her stomach lurched as she was lifted off her feet and fell into the murky depths below. It was a disorienting impact. Panic struck almost immediately when she discovered that the water was colder than she had anticipated. Laughter rang out above her. Joel and Vincent clapped each other on the back while standing at the railing, hunched over in laughter. The others laughed uncomfortably, and some took out their phones to record the incident. The laughter, however, didn't last long. Lisa splashing frantically was the only sound in the eerily quiet ocean. Tom Ridgewell, the only person sober enough to have been observing the water, uttered the words that would chill everyone on board. It was a shark. He noticed a sinister, streamlined shadow moving just below the surface. He initially believed that his imagination was deceiving him, but the distinctive dorsal fin that sliced through the water validated his worst fear. Before Lisa could comprehend the warning, she felt a strong object strike her leg. She experienced a sudden intense pain as the water surrounding her turned a sickening shade of crimson. The force briefly pulled her beneath before she emerged, gasping in pain. Chaos broke out on the deck. Everyone rushed to get things done, dropping drinks and leaving phones behind. A life ring was thrown, but it missed her by a few feet. An individual fumbled with a rope. After realizing what they had done, Joel and Vincent stood motionless, their faces devoid of color. Lisa struggled to keep her head above water, but the shark persisted. It was a tiger shark attracted to the smell of blood and was easily 10 feet long. It made a quick circle around her before launching itself once more and clamping its strong jaws down on her thigh. Her heartbreaking scream broke the shocked silence that had descended upon the yacht. The sound was unadulterated and brimming with unfathomable fear. As they frantically tried to pull her back, adrenaline rushed through the group. Tom tossed a second rope, which landed near enough for Lisa to get to it. The shark hit her again despite her feeble grasp. This time, it refused to release. The deck of the yacht descended into pure hysteria. Voices were trembling and desperate as they called emergency services. However, they all knew that help would never come in time. The sea sucked up Lisa in a matter of seconds. Her outstretched arm with fingers just above the surface was the last thing anyone saw before the water closed around her. The ensuing silence was deafening. The group stood still, their bodies rigid with shock, their faces pale. The only sound disturbing the whirling mingling of red and black water where Lisa had been moments before was the soft rippling of the waves. No one said anything for what seemed like hours. Subsequently, they fell onto the deck one by one, some crying and others just gazing into the depths. They felt the full force of what had transpired. There wasn't anything left to do when authorities were called by a distress call that had been sounded amid the confusion. Despite a thorough search, Lisa's body was never found. According to the official report, she was presumed deceased. The cause was a deadly shark attack. There was an unrelenting media frenzy in the days that followed. Like wildfire, the news of Lisa Denshaw's horrifying death sparked controversy and outrage. Concerns were raised regarding her friends' carelessness regarding the propriety of their behavior and whether or not charges ought to be brought. The public was split. Some saw it as criminal negligence, while others saw it as a tragic accident. The main subjects of the investigation were Vincent Rallis and Joel Harrington. Even though they were devastated by what had transpired, there were repercussions for what they did. They faced charges of reckless endangerment resulting in death following a comprehensive investigation. The testimony was heartbreaking, and the court proceedings were drawn out. In agonizing detail, witnesses described the night, including the push, the laughter, and the moment when a joke turned into a nightmare. The decision was unambiguous. They received a sentence of 3 years in prison after being found guilty. While some contended that the penalty was excessively mild, others felt the lifelong guilt they would bear was greater than any legal repercussion. Life would never be the same for the other members of the group. Due to his guilt, Tom Ridgwell, who had discovered the shark too late, withdrew from social interactions. The others turned away from one another because they couldn't deal with the memories of their close friendships. Devastated and distraught, Lisa's family established a foundation in her honor that promoted awareness of ocean safety and responsible boating practices. It became a means for them to ensure that no more lives would be lost due to a stupid joke. The deep, expansive, and apathetic waters off Western Australia have not changed. The waves whispered untold tales as they continued to lap against the coast. And the ocean, as always, kept its secrets somewhere beneath the surface. The scent of salt and fish filled the air in Crescent City, California, a small coastal town, on August 17, 2009. The Pacific Ocean's blue surface was surprisingly calm as it stretched out in all directions. Despite its history of deadly waves and violent storms, the city was known for its thriving fishing community and shark cage diving excursions, which drew thrill-seekers nationwide. The 52-year-old Reno, Nevada resident Teresa Bickford had never ventured this far out into the ocean. Something about this trip drew her in, even though she had always feared deep water. Maybe she wanted to finally step outside her comfort zone, or perhaps it was her friend's excitement. Even though Teresa weighed 300 pounds and was accustomed to being gawked at by strangers, she felt inconspicuous at sea, as if she were a mere being in the vast ocean. On a fishing trip with 3 of her friends, Doyle Prentice, Eleanor Veston, and Murray Glaive, she soon found herself in the middle of an unplanned adventure. After discovering a company offering shark cage dives, Teresa was persuaded to join the group. The Marauder's Wake was a well-used boat with cracks in the paint from years of exposure to the sea. The crew comprised Captain Hollis Dunmere and his deckhand Ezra Riegler. a reserved man who had seen plenty of shark encounters but didn't want to discuss them. Although it had some rust, the cage itself was still strong. A bucket of fish blood and guts was used as bait to draw in the great white sharks that patrolled the shore. Teresa found it difficult to put on her wetsuit, but the rest of the group wore it. When she eventually succeeded, she felt confined, but she dismissed the pain. She wouldn't turn around now that she had made it this far. Teresa experienced a weird uneasiness in her chest as the cage was lowered into the water. Her breath came through the regulator in short gasps as she held on to the metal bars. When they got used to it, the initially murky water gradually became clear despite the predators lurking beyond schools of fish darted by. The ocean changed after that. In the distance, a shadow moved slowly and deliberately. A slight change in the energy of the water was the first indication that the great white was there. The sea seemed to have taken a breath and was holding it. The shark appeared to be a hideous being more than 15 feet long, with a body made up of scars and muscle. Black eyes stared at the cage as it made one full circle. Ezra muttered something under his breath while observing from above. Although he had previously seen sharks, this one was unique. It moved with aggression and a purpose that went beyond simple curiosity. They might have to bring the cage up earlier than expected, he indicated to Captain Dunmere, but the shark lunged before they could do anything. Its enormous jaws seized the metal bars, causing the cage to tremble violently. The water drowned out Teresa's and her friends' cries as they were flung against the sides. Once again, the shark charged after retreating, shoving its nose through a hole in the cage that should have been too small for a creature of its size. Teresa was the most intimate. The shark's teeth instantly tore apart her leg as they dug in. The shark yanked her forward before she could even register the pain from the shockwave the bite sent through her body. A dark cloud of blood billowed in the water, scattering the fish. As the crew above rushed to pull it back up, the cage tilted and moaned under the strain. With his fingers digging into Teresa's wetsuit, Doyle clung to her, but the shark violently twisted its body. The swirling water drowned out Teresa's cries as she was ripped from his grasp. She felt like a rag doll as the shark's strong jaws did what they were made to do: crush, tear, and devour. Despite Captain Dunmere's yelling commands, the boat was powerless to stop it. The water was a riot of color and movement. Eleanor's eyes widened in horror as she forced herself into a corner of the cage. Murray was pounding on the bars as though that would change anything. The shark let go briefly and Teresa's body drifted limply. She briefly appeared to be being pulled back. However, the predator was far from done. It made one last lunge and tore into her once more, consuming the majority of her torso. The surviving survivors could only watch in horror as the last of the pieces slowly sank. Satisfied, the shark vanished into the depths, leaving only fragments of blood behind. Doyle, Eleanor, and Murray shook and fell onto the deck as the cage was pulled up. Captain Dunmere, who had witnessed a lot in his years at sea, just removed his hat and muttered a silent curse while Ezra stood still, his face white. An official report was filed after the Coast Guard was contacted. Although experts quickly reminded the public that such incidents were uncommon, the attack made headlines. The heartbreaking truth of Teresa's death was difficult for her family to accept. The image of the great white's black dead eyes and the immense power it possessed haunted the surviving friends for eternity. Residents of Crescent City carried on with their daily routines. As unconcerned as ever, the ocean flowed, erasing the final remnants of what had happened. Ezra Riegler left shortly after, unwilling to tempt fate again, but the Marauder's wake carried on with its expeditions. He never mentioned that day, but Captain Dunmere continued taking thrill-seekers to see the sharks, and somewhere beneath the waves, the great white shark prowled on a silent ancient force, neither good nor evil, just a predator doing what it had always done. Residents of Esperance, a small coastal town in Western Australia, had long considered it a hidden treasure. Swimmers, surfers, and fishermen found paradise in its turquoise waters, rocky cliffs, and immaculate beaches. In 2014, the town had not yet experienced the modern tourism boom. The sun and tides governed the residents' routines, which were quiet and predictable. Barbara Jenkins, a widow who was 72 years old, had spent almost 20 years in Esperance. She had relocated to this peaceful town to enjoy the ocean after retiring from her position as a school librarian in Perth. She would slip into the chilly waters close to Twilight Beach for her daily swim every morning at around 6:15. She followed a sacred routine that was a sign of peace and solitude. It started the same way on the morning of June 18th. Her well-worn bathing suit clung to Barbara's slender frame as she walked barefoot along the damp sand under a soft, misty gray sky. Feeling the familiar chill of the Southern Ocean against her skin, she waded into the water after adjusting her swim cap. She stayed within the shallow waters, never venturing beyond where her feet could touch the sea floor. The water was unusually still. There was no wind, and the seagulls' typical cries weren't there. The silence was unsettling, even though it should have been serene. Barbara was floating on her back, staring at the sky, unaware of the shadowy figure moving beneath her. Suddenly, she felt a tremendous force strike from below. Her left arm was clamped under a pressure she had never experienced before. When she became aware of what was happening, a searing, blinding pain swept through her body. Her forearm had been grabbed by a great white shark, whose rows of sharp teeth were tearing through flesh and bone with frightening ease. Barbara trusted her gut. She kicked her legs against the predator's rough hide as she thrashed violently. Her body twisted in ways she hadn't thought possible at her age. The shark, momentarily startled by her sudden resistance, loosened its grip. It was just enough. Barbara yanked her arm free, but not before the teeth tore deep into her flesh. The water around her turned a murky red. Her mind raced. The shoreline felt miles away. The pain was overwhelming, but the fear of what lurked beneath her was far worse. She had to keep moving. With her good arm, she began to paddle, her strokes weak but determined. Blood streamed from her wound, trailing behind her like a beacon for the predator. The sound was a raw, desperate scream, and Callum Henshaw, a 28-year-old surfer, was waxing his board on shore. With his heart thumping in his chest, he turned to face the water. At first, all he could see was the boundless blue. Then he noticed a figure struggling in the middle of the soft waves. Without hesitation, Callum grabbed his board and sprinted into the water. He paddled furiously, his strong arms cutting through the waves. As he neared Barbara, he could see the extent of her injuries. Her face was pale, her lips trembling from pain and shock. Her left arm, or what remained of it, was a mess of torn flesh and exposed bone. He reached her just as she started to slip beneath the surface. He hoisted her onto his board with a grunt, straining under the dead weight. As Barbara's eyes opened, she let out ragged gasps of breath. Callum knew she couldn't hear him, so he told her to stay with him. Then, with all his remaining strength, he paddled back to shore. It felt like an endless journey, with every wave acting as a harsh barrier between life and death. He didn't stop when his feet eventually made contact with the sand. His hands slick with Barbara's blood, and he pulled her onto the beach. With a mixture of horror and urgency on their faces, a small group of people assembled. A retired nurse named Edith Lawton was among the onlookers who hurried forward and placed a towel against Barbara's severed arm. In a matter of seconds, the unrelenting bleeding seeped through the fabric. A siren's shriek filled the air minutes after someone called for an ambulance. Paramedics tried to stabilize Barbara as she drifted in and out of consciousness. She was placed on a stretcher, the emergency gear surrounding her dwarfing her slender frame. The last thing she saw before everything turned black was Callum's worried face and her blood-stained hands. 6 hours were spent on the surgery. Despite their best efforts, the doctors at the hospital could not save her arm. Just below the elbow, her left limb ended when she woke up. Like an oppressive blanket, the reality of her new life enveloped her. It was a long and slow recovery. She suffered from phantom pain, making everyday chores extremely difficult. But Barbara was nothing if not resilient. She adapted, learning to use her remaining arm for daily tasks. She continued to be humorous, frequently making jokes about tasting the shark, and it decided she was too tough to chew. Later, experts investigated the attack's circumstances. According to marine biologist Dr. Leonard Harkins, the shark was probably a juvenile, possibly mistaking Barbara's sluggish movements for an injured seal. Others hypothesized that the murky morning waters facilitated the attack because sharks primarily rely on vision when hunting in precise conditions. Barbara would not allow fear to rule her life despite the trauma. She never went swimming in the ocean again, but she kept going for her morning walks on the beach. Callum became a close friend, frequently dropping by to share stories about surfing and coffee. Though the tale of Barbara Jenkins and the great white shark would continue to be a folktale among residents for years to come, the town of Esperance, which the terror of the attack had rocked, eventually found its peaceful rhythm again. 2011, on a humid August afternoon, the sun pounded the waters off Destin, Florida. Known for its rich marine life and glistening emerald waters, the Gulf of Mexico had extended indefinitely past the horizon. For many years, locals and visitors have favored the coastline because of its immaculate beaches and perfect water sports conditions. However, the Gulf was home to various marine predators, including the infamously violent bull shark beneath its alluring exterior. That afternoon, 18-year-old Jessica Holloway, full of adventure, boarded her jet ski. She had been on a summer vacation with friends in the area before attending college the following fall. After most of the morning relaxing on the beach, Jessica decided to use her rented jet ski to speed through the waves and cool off as the afternoon heat got unbearable. As she revved the engine and ran ahead, the wind was light, the water was calm, and the sound of seagulls occasionally filled the air. The adrenaline rush was precisely what she needed. Unaware of the danger below, she navigated the water in a zigzag pattern, leaving behind arcs of sea spray. She was unaware that a big bull shark had been skulking around the shallows. Bull sharks were renowned for their ability to swim in brackish waters and even venture into rivers, unlike many other sharks that favored deeper waters. They were violent, erratic, and fiercely protective. It was probably attracted to the jet ski disturbance, and the water's vibrations triggered its predatory instincts. At the time, Jessica was turning sharply. She lost her equilibrium due to a sudden strong shock and was in the air before she could react. The impact of the water briefly took her aback. A sharp burning pain pierced her leg as she fumbled to get her bearings. It was a sensation she had never experienced before, and it was sudden and overwhelming. Someone had bitten her. The water turned crimson around her, and then she realized. While she struggled to find the attack's origin, panic shot through her veins. Despite its brief hold, the shark had severely punctured her calf. The beast still circled in the water despite her instincts telling her to leave. With her arms cutting through the water, Jessica kicked wildly to get to her overturned jet ski. The shark was still too near, which was the issue. Her leg ached with every desperate stroke, and every movement she made was excruciating. Her friends Cassidy Vance and Ryder Lennox had witnessed her fall a few yards away. They thought it was an accident when they first saw the red bloom in the water and her frantic struggle. Ryder, who had previously been on his jet ski, wasted no time. He revved his engine and shot toward her, his mind racing for a way to get her out of the water without tipping himself over. Jessica managed to get one arm onto her jet ski, trying to pull herself up, but her strength was waning. Sensing easy prey, the shark made another pass, brushing against her leg. She felt even more terrified just by the touch. Instinctively, she kicked out the pain, causing black spots to appear in her eyes. Ryder got there in time. Without hesitation, he reached out, grabbed her wrist, and yanked her onto his jet ski with a force that nearly unseated him. Cassidy followed him and pushed them to head for the coast quickly. The shark swam into the depths, possibly realizing it had lost its meal. Jessica was barely conscious by the time they reached the dock. A group of onlookers had gathered, drawn by the sound of jet skis racing toward shore. 911 had already been dialed. Blood dripped from her leg, staining the dock as Ryder and Cassidy eased her down. Within minutes, paramedics were there quickly evaluating her injuries before transferring her to a stretcher. Physicians at the hospital verified that the bite had barely missed major arteries. She would need stitches and extensive treatment to prevent infection, but she would survive. The physical scars would heal, but the psychological impact of the attack was another matter. For weeks, Jessica had nightmares. The feeling of helplessness in the water haunted her, and the memory of the shark's presence was an ever-present shadow in her mind. But as time passed, she found herself reflecting not only on the terror, but also on the sheer randomness of the attack. It wasn't personal. She had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Determined not to let fear dictate her life, she returned to the water months later. This time, however, she was far more cautious. She educated herself about sharks, learned their behaviors, and understood their role in the ecosystem. While she would never forget what happened, she refused to let the experience define her. Jessica's encounter became a cautionary tale among locals and tourists alike. The ocean, as beautiful as it was, demanded respect, and though she had come face to face with one of the ocean's most feared predators, she had lived to tell the tale. The encounter had changed her and left its mark not just on her body, but on her very soul. From that day forward, every time her fingers traced the jagged scar, she didn't just see a reminder of the attack. She saw proof of her resilience, of the fight she had waged and won, It symbolizes the survival of the unbreakable spirit that had carried her through the depths of terror and pain. The ocean had tested her and pushed her to the edge, but it had not taken her, and in that she found a quiet strength, an unshakable defiance against fear. In the summer of 2008, the coastal town of Trinidad, California, was known for its rugged cliffs, dense fog, and powerful Pacific waves. A place where surfers sought both adventure and solitude. The frigid waters were not for the faint of heart. Among them was Sarah Jennings, a seasoned surfer who had spent years navigating the unpredictable ocean swells. That afternoon, Sarah paddled farther out from shore as the sun sank, bathing the Pacific in an orange glow. The waves were perfect, the ocean was serene, and the wind smelled of seaweed and salt. Besides the distant gull's occasional cry, she could only hear the steady sound of water crashing against her board. There was an unwritten rule among surfers in these waters, despite the calm environment: never get too comfortable. The great white shark was one of the most dangerous predators on the coast of Trinidad. Sarah was sitting on her board looking out to sea for the next wave when she noticed a strange change in the water's motion. At first, it was a subtle subliminal disturbance. The cold that seeped into her wetsuit now felt different. Not just the chill of the Pacific, but something else, something more primal. She dismissed the feeling, pushing away the slight unease. But then, out of the corner of her eye, she noticed a dark shape gliding beneath her board. It circled once, then again, slowly. Her first thought was a seal, but the movement was too deliberate and controlled. Her pulse quickened. The weight of the moment pressed against her chest. She had encountered sharks before, but this was different. This was not an animal merely passing through. This one was observing her. This was instinct. She started paddling toward the coast with steady strokes, avoiding sudden movements that might lead to an attack. Her arms moved like they had after years of surfing, and her board sliced through the water. The water beneath her, however, exploded in a burst of strength and force. Without hesitation, the shark struck. A huge, great white, almost 15 feet long, shot upward, its jaws snagging Sarah's thigh. She felt a searing, blinding pain as she was pulled away from her board. As the attack force sent her plummeting beneath the surface, saltwater rushed into her mouth and nose. For an instant, the world was a frenzied whirl of pain, movement, and bubbles. The shark's jaws began to loosen their hold on her somewhere in the confusion. She acted on instinct. With her arms grabbing for her board, she kicked with the last of her strength and forced herself toward the surface. With adrenaline temporarily numbing the pain in her leg, she pulled herself back onto it after her hands collided with the foam. In stark contrast to the deep blue of the Pacific, blood poured into the water surrounding her. The shark had more to come. With the confidence of her blood's aroma, it circled once more. Unexpectedly, the second lunge occurred. Sarah was sent sprawling back into the water by the force of the blow before she could even react. The impact left her disoriented, her limbs feeling sluggish as shock and blood loss set in. The world around her was surreal, as if she were caught in a slow-motion nightmare. Then she heard voices through the fog. Other surfers were getting closer, so there were shouts and frantic paddling. One of them, Tobias Helvig, first approached her, grabbed the back of her wetsuit, and pulled her partially onto his board. Another surfer, Isla Cormac, shouted toward the beach and called for help. The ocean, once her sanctuary, now felt like an inescapable trap. Every second felt unbearably long as Tobias and Isla struggled against the tide and pulled her toward shore, while keeping cautious eyes on the water. Sarah's vision became fuzzy by the time they arrived at the beach. The sand felt unbelievably warm against her skin as she was hoisted onto the shore. The people who had gathered stared down at her, their faces contorted in horror at the deep cut on her thigh where blood was still dripping onto the floor. Someone tried to stop the bleeding by applying a towel to the wound. The siren's distant shriek indicated there was help on the way. The paramedics moved swiftly to load her onto a stretcher and apply a tourniquet. The shock subsided as she was hoisted into the ambulance and was replaced by a crippling fatigue. She had escaped death. However, she would never be able to shake the memory of those soulless black eyes that watched her from the depths. Sarah was standing on the cliffs with a view of the same ocean stretch months after the stitches were taken out and the pain had subsided to a far-off ache. As unrelenting as ever, the Pacific's surface was stunning and misleading. To recover what had been stolen from her that day, a part of her yearned to return to the waves. But another part that had survived the unadulterated power of nature knew that things would never be the same. She would eventually go surfing again. The water, however, would now always mean something different to her. The ocean had always been her refuge, the one place where she could breathe freely, where the world's chaos faded beneath the rhythmic pulse of the waves. It was her sanctuary, her solace, until the day it wasn't. Now, every cresting wave carried the weight of memory, the sharp sting of salt and fear entwined. The echoes of that moment haunted the tide, the primal terror, the searing pain, the desperate struggle against forces far greater than herself. And yet, despite it all, she could not turn away. Beneath the fear was reverence, a profound understanding of the ocean's untamed beauty and merciless power. It was not just a place of escape anymore. It was a reckoning, a force she feared and loved, a vast living entity that had tested her, shaped her, and refused to let her go.